Welcome back. This time we're talking about my top 10 most disappointing films of 2017. Yes, we're only days away from the new year, and it's time to take a look back at all of the films that we saw over the past 12 months. The good, the bad, and the weird. Or in this case, the most disappointing. Now this is different than what will soon be up as well, my worst films of 2017. This is probably the most subjective of all of my list, although any list about favorites or disfavorites is going to be subjective. But this list is essentially how much anticipation I had for a film combined with its end result. So a film might be worse, but I had less expectations for it, hence its lower or higher on the list, however you want to look at it. So I tried to balance those two things when ranking these 10 films for this list. But since we have 10 films to talk about, let's dive right into this. Coming in at number 10 is Transformers: The Last Knight. Now, if there's any franchise out there that I have zero expectations for, it's the Transformers franchise. These films, for the most part, have been horrible to very horrible. So suffice it to say, I went into The Last Knight expecting a bad movie. The fact that it still made it onto my biggest disappointments of the year should tell you just how bad this movie is. It's amazing that people were given $200+ million to make a film and did not bother to make a coherent script. But moving on from that disaster, let's get to number 9, Justice League. Now this is a film that I generally enjoyed, and also, like Transformers, went in with little expectations due to the quality of the previous DCEU films, with the exception of Wonder Woman. My biggest issue with that film, aside from the other plot issues, is its villain, which was boring and bland, and as a avid reader of many years of DC Comics, a character I had to look up on Wikipedia to figure out who he was. So I just would have figured that in the first ever live-action cinematic Justice League movie, we would have actually gotten a decent villain, and that we did not. But as I said, this is a film that I generally enjoyed, and that's why it's only 9 on this list. Moving on to number 8, we have Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Men Tell No Tales. The original trilogy of Pirates of the Caribbean films is one of my favorite trilogies. The fourth film did not work for me at all. And while Dead Men Tell No Tales did correct some of my issues with the fourth film, it is a film that has a lot of pacing issues and a pretty anticlimactic ending. So while it was a disappointment, I didn't go into the film with a lot of expectations, and that's why it finished at number 8. But moving on, we have The Dark Tower. Now, the Dark Tower books are one of my favorite book series. In fact, I got to go to a talk by Stephen King and had the opportunity to have him sign a book. And I had him sign my copy of the 7th book in the series, The Dark Tower. I love this series. And really, I never thought they were going to be able to pull it off. My expectations were always a little low. And I will say, although this in no way is a faithful adaptation of the book, I did kind of enjoy it. The biggest problem with it is if you have read the books, you're probably inclined to not like it. And if you haven't read the books, the movie is going to be very confusing. So it basically cut off both its legs and prevented both factions from really latching on. I intellectually know that it would have been almost impossible to make a successful, faithful adaptation of these books. Would have loved to have seen what it looked like. And while we're on the subject of Stephen King adaptations, this will most likely be the most controversial inclusion on this list, but at number 6, I have It. Now, this was a film that seems to have been almost universally loved by critics and audiences. I've seen it on Best 10 lists. I've seen it being called one of the best horror films in years. I will say it's a technically well-made film from a visual standpoint. The young actors playing the main characters are phenomenal. This is in no way a reflection on them. I just found the film not scary. I found the special effects subpar at best and made me want to laugh when I should have been cringing in fear. And I felt that the changes they made from the book to the movie lessened a lot of the impact of the story and basically took a lot of the meaning out of the events of what we're seeing on screen. It essentially becomes a random sequence of events rather than having a deeper meaning behind them. And obviously I'm coming from this as someone who read the book and actually read the book just before seeing the movie. But I just did not find this an enjoyable experience. And I know I'm on the minority on that, but this film definitely disappointed me. We're now on the top half of the list, and starting that out at number 5 is Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. I was so ready for a good Luc Besson science fiction film. We did not get that with Lucy, but everything I saw in the trailers for this film just made me think this is going to be it. This was absolutely a passion project of Besson's, but this also shows the potential drawbacks of a passion project injected with too much passion. Visually, it's stunning. I liked the main actors in it. I liked the setting and the world that we were being introduced to. The problem is Besson wanted to showcase all of his favorite moments from this comic book series, and it became one of the least focused films of the entire year. It just could not pull it all together into a truly satisfying film. I did enjoy this film overall, but I enjoyed it more for its individual moments than any kind of coherent story from start to finish. And I just wish he had been able to settle himself down and tell one story really well instead of trying to do 5 or 6 and just not pull it off. Coming in at number 4, and this is where we get into the truly bad films of the year. The films that I can't even say, well, I still kind of enjoyed it. No, we're to the point where we're looking at some truly bad films. And coming in at number 4 is The Snowman. Now, this is a film that I did not go in with a huge amount of expectations, but based on the cast, which included Michael Fassbender, the director who has a good track record of making very strong films, and the fact that the story was based on an international bestseller, that everything was going right for this film, and essentially everything went absolutely wrong. This is an incoherent crime thriller with extraneous plot threads that take up seemingly a third of the runtime that go nowhere. Poor production values, and possibly the most anticlimactic ending of 2017. There are a lot of rumors swirling around this film that the studio shut down the production before filming was done, and honestly, I can believe it, because it's one of the only reasons why this film being that bad makes sense. Speaking of movies that seemingly have everything going for it, up next is The Circle. This film starred Emma Watson and Tom Hanks, was based on a popular book, and is an absolute disaster of a movie. This is one of the only films I can think of in which its main character seemingly does everything she possibly can to get us to dislike her, while the film around her is attempting to ensure that we like her for some reason. On its surface, this seems to be a film about the dangers of losing our privacy in a social media world. All the while, everything the characters in the movies are doing seemingly embrace it. I just could not shake my head enough walking out of this movie. It was horrible. And one that I did have some decent expectations for based on the trailers and based on the cast. I'll give the cast credit. They do their best with some really horrible material. Speaking of horrible material, coming in at number 2 is Resident Evil: The Final Chapter. Now, This film is not good, but it really should be lower on the list, except I actually went into this film with some decent expectations. The Resident Evil franchise has always been a guilty pleasure of mine. The first three films I feel are genuinely good. They're enjoyable movies, and set up an interesting story that the subsequent films have, one after another, been ignoring that story. And my hope with this final chapter was that Paul W.S. Anderson was finally going to bring it all together. He could not wait any longer. We were going to have all these loose threads tied together, or at least some of them. But not only does the story in this film ignore all of the loose threads over the previous however many films, it also completely ignores the cliffhanger of the previous film to go in a new direction that defies logic and defies the existing canon set up in these earlier films. Nothing that happens in this film feels in any way connected to what we got in the previous ones. And as someone who actually enjoyed this franchise, it was almost like a slap in the face. It's like, we don't care about these other films. We're going to end this series the way we want to, with this whole unconnected, weird story that doesn't make sense to begin with. And thus, this was my second most disappointing film of 2017. So now we're at my number one biggest disappointing film of 2017. I will freely admit it is not the worst film. It did not make my top 10 for the worst films of 2017. But it tops this list because I went into it with some of the highest expectations of any film this year. And in many ways it let me down, and that is Star Wars: The Last Jedi. I fully appreciate that Rian Johnson wanted to go in a bold direction with this film. I fully appreciate that visually it looks wonderful. I liked his directing style to a point, and when this film is on point, it is so on point. Unfortunately, this film is not its own being. It is a film that was coming on the heels of 2 years of expectations based on another film by a different director, which left half of its plot open and awaiting resolution. And Rian Johnson and The Last Jedi seemingly either had little or no interest in providing satisfying resolutions to those threads. I can appreciate why he went in certain directions, and in any other film, or if this had been episode 7, I would have been fine with it, probably. But you can't make these decisions in a vacuum when you're talking about a Star Wars film that people have been waiting for 2 years. And even taking away those expectations and the disappointments in the resolutions, this is an overly long film with a very boring and sometimes off-putting second act. This is one of the first Star Wars films I've ever seen that I have no interest in seeing it again. I still, several weeks after seeing it, have no interest in seeing it a second time. And that is not good for a Star Wars film. I just found this film utterly disappointing. So that rounds out this list of my most disappointing movies of 2017. I'm sure several inclusions will be controversial. But for now, I want to turn it over to you. What were your biggest disappointments of 2017 when it comes to movies? As always, you can subscribe to my channel and click the little bell button to get notifications of new videos. You can check out some of my other reviews. And until next time, I'll see you at the movies.